through credits out there, and we look at that, and they've grown. And we're trying to forecast forward what's going to happen in the future, and obviously they're going up, not down. So therefore, that's another challenge that we face on the property tax. If I now go to the, if there are any questions on the property tax, I'll.
You have any questions on the property tax specifically?
On the income tax, we look at the resident employment. This is a series from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and this is not the payroll employment that gets a lot of attention lately from our good friends in the press. That's another different series. This is what they call the labor force series, and we always look at the employment of people who reside in the county. They may work in the district or some other jurisdiction because their tax is basically where they live. The challenge to these data from BLS, they're revised, and they do the revised every March. Now, sometimes they only go back a year to do the revisions. This includes the payroll data. But last year, or last March, they went back 5 years to do a revision, and they pulled us down. So that is something that wasn't in our recommended budget because we didn't have the data to do that in March. We have the data that's available in February to do our forecast. So when these revisions occur, that puts another challenge on how we're going to do on our income taxes. And when they pull it down, and I think it was pretty good number. The employment rate is not the issue here. It's the number of people employed. That's the challenge. And that's where we have the challenge to go forward because we based our forecast going forward on that baseline data. So if we're at a certain level going into the recommended budget period and they bring it down, that means it's shift down going forward. So that's going to have an effect on our income taxes eventually. Salary and wage data, that's been pretty stable, and that's fairly based on this, again, the BLS series is, and we also get the series from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. They provide income for the county, but there's a lagging. The last year that we have data are 2017. We're now in 2019 and 18. So we have to look at their series growing, and then we look at 3 forecasts. This Bureau of Revenue Estimates provides forecasts at the state level on revenues, wages and salaries, also on dividends, interest, and rents. But we drill down to the county level based on historical pattern. We also get forecasts from Moody's Analytics, and we also a firm out of Washington called Woods and Poole. So we have at least a forecast of wage and salary data, income data, to basically average. Because as the further you go out, you're going to get a wedge. So we use that as a source for our income variables. And the individual income statistics we get from the Bureau of Revenue Estimates. And that is for the state the statistics of income and its tax summary reports. Again, they're dated. The last SOI data, statistics of income, was 2015. Tax summary is 2017. But at least it gives us an idea of the breakdown of the types of income. We always talk about capital gains. We talk about wage and salary income, so we use that as a benchmark going forward to look at the forecast. Finally, on capital gains, this has always been a challenge for us when it comes to our November reconciliation distribution. I see Mr. Katz is nodding in agreement.
Absolutely.
The challenge here is the only forecast that we have is from the Congressional Budget Office. They do a forecast every fall at the national level. And I've queried our colleagues at the CBO, how do you come up with that forecast? They basically take a percentage of the GDP and apply it forward. So having that information, historically, we look at our growth rate from the statistics of income on the statistics of income versus historically, that comes also from Treasury. On their growth percentage change, they would see what kind of relationship there is there and trend it out based on the CBO forecast. That's another challenge because it's been as high as 20% and then down to 5%. So that goes into our income tax model because, quite frankly, Madam Chair, members, that's the only data that's out there. That's unfortunate. I'm sure some private forecasts do that, but we always look at the government forecast as our source. On the recordation and transfer tax, there are 2 parts of that. There is the residential transfer, and there's also, and recordation, and there's also the commercial. The residential, basically what Mr. Smith has in, we look at the mortgage interest rates, we also look at the home sales and median home sales value. That we get from the Realtors Association. They'll tell us what the existing home sales have been on a monthly basis and what the median and average sales prices have been. Going forward, we get the data from Moody's as a forecast for that. So that's where we get that. The commercial side is more problematic because of the volatility. We talked about in the new construction, the volatility in the new construction that we've experienced, specifically on the commercial side. The volatility on the commercial, the non-residential, and the recordation tax and transfer tax has been rather dramatic over the last year or two. And historically, the commercial or non-residential has been about 20% of the total, so that when you see that kind of volatility, that will affect our bottom line on our transfer recordation tax. We look at the data at the beginning for the first half of the year and see how those numbers are coming in, and Treasury provides those information to us, how those numbers are coming in on transfer recordation for half year compared to the half year prior to that. Look at that growth rate. That's an assumption we make, and sometimes with the commercial side, that's a very heroic assumption to make, because with housing sales, you probably have a very good idea for the rest of the year, but for the commercial side, that's very volatile, as I said before. So that has been a little bit of a problematic for us going forward in that forecast. The energy tax, of course, is the weather and the consumption, specifically natural gas and electricity are the big components of that. And of course, when you don't have a very cold winter or a very hot summer, the consumptions are going to be a lot lower than what you estimate historically. So those are the economic indicators that we look at in terms of the forecast for both the income tax, property tax, recordation tax. One last item on the income tax. We do work closely with the State Bureau of Revenue Estimates. They do a forecast with the Board of Revenue Estimates in September, December, and March. We look at their forecasts and drill down to us, because based on their forecast for the current fiscal year, we have a process called what do they collect at the state level and how is it distributed to us through the distribution formula. So we take their data, look at what they're expected to collect or forecast collections for both estimated payments and withholdings, and then break it down by each of our quarterly distributions, November, February, May, and then we have June, July, and August as one quarter, and look at the distribution formula, because that's set in stone for that current fiscal year. Again, we don't get that until November, but at least when we get into the fiscal plan update in December, we have a fairly good idea. But then again, it depends on the state's forecast for their numbers. And let me give an example, and I apologize to our good colleagues at the state. And the Board of Revenue Estimates came up with a decline of their general fund in their December report of $45 million. In their March report, after we prepared our budget, it was $135 million. That's $185 million that they wrote down on the income tax. Translating to us, that shows we're going to get a reduction based on our forecast, since we're relying on their forecast. And I want to be very careful. They do an outstanding job of doing their forecast. And so that's why we rely a lot on their numbers to drill down to our numbers. So having said that, that's my discussion on the economic indicators. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's see, we have Councilmember Friesen.
Thank you. That was very interesting. It's always interesting to hear the process. We always hear about how iterative it is, and you just shared some of the iterations that help us to get there. You ended where a question that I had from the beginning, and I have sat through many of those Bureau of Revenue Estimates briefings, and certainly can appreciate that with people who are a lot smarter than I am, present company included here. But I did have a question about that. I mean, I recognize the challenge here, right? The biggest challenge is, right, the two most important revenue estimates are ones that are coming for you pretty late in the game. You know, the December estimate is carrying all of the wealthiest taxpayers, those 50 taxpayers we talk about who are capital gains, the most volatile, predominantly non-wage earning taxpayers. They file in October because they have very complicated returns, and they're selling businesses and, partnerships and all kinds of other complicated, finances that they have. That comes out in as part of the December estimate, and then that is, you've already begun your process in August, as we talked about here on Tuesday. The process of crafting the budget begins in earnest in August, and so you're basically 3/4 of the way through the game. The second big one is end of the year. The decisions of tax law change from one year to another, as we've seen, and they're getting crazier and crazier and dumber at the federal level when it comes to these things. And so the volatility of those end of the year changes based on advice from accountants is getting more and more extreme, that the difference of a week or a day could be the difference of significant amounts of money for those same 50 taxpayers. And you're not getting that until a week within the time frame, March 15th, that the charter states that you have to send us your budget. And the cake is baked at that point. I mean, there's really not much you can do. And so I recognize that challenge. And so I've been thinking a lot, and I've had some initial conversations with Senator Madaleno about this too. Is there a way that we can it sounds to me like you're using public data, at the federal level, from the state level, from Moody's and a few other places. But is there a way to share some of the underlying data that is being used, that they are using as part of their iterative process, so that we're not waiting until basically March the 1st or March the 8th, when that March meeting, I used to be involved in scheduling that meeting. I know how late it is and how close it comes to March 15th, so that it isn't a last minute scramble, so that you have some idea, even if you're not going to know the number that they're going to fall on, you're going to know some of the underlying data points that they're using to get there, so it doesn't come as a total shock like it did this year in March or in December. Are there ways, are there things that we can be doing? Are there things we could be asking for at the state level to do a better job of, collaborating and communicating before public data comes out, and then we extrapolate that public data to here, and all of a sudden it is a proverbial, fiscal bomb that gets dropped at the last minute, and, we can have a food fight over what's the best way to deal with the damage. And I had my opinions, and the administration had its opinions. I respect that. But how do we know it's coming beforehand so we can start evacuating, to limit the damage?
The best way to approach this is to get to exactly what you're addressing, is what are the underlying factors they have to get to their data on their income tax. Let's use the income tax as an example. We get on a regular basis, irregular, I would say every couple months, their estimates of the withholdings that they expect to come in, actual withholdings that come in, and their estimated withholdings that come in. Same with estimated payments. So we use that, and that's data that they have that we get from them as on a monthly. They provide that on a monthly basis. We use that data to give us an estimate. Again, you talked about December and February. Let me give an example of what happened, if I may, on February. They were estimating a 5% reduction in estimated payments for the fourth quarter of tax year 2018. We had a meeting not only a month later. Their final numbers showed a 32% drop in estimated payments. So within 1 month, they themselves had two different sets of numbers. They basically provided us, but would we have gotten that any earlier? I don't think so, because they had not gotten their data into their system to show that. So again, on a month-to-month basis, we can get it, but if there is such a dramatic change from month-to-month basis or from their forecast, that's all we can get in the details from them. Does that?
Yeah, it does. But so just to
Go ahead.
Harp on that point, do you see this as a individual year anomaly, that was just a huge shift, or is this a structural challenge that we face? Because I want to fix the structural change. Obviously we should be prepared for anomalies, but I think there are structural issues that we can resolve. And if you don't see it as a structural issue, then I think I maybe have less of a concern about it. And there's probably other areas where we can make structural changes to fix those issues. But if you think it's structural, then I think we ought to, continue the conversation. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, my apologies. The structural way I just explained, we look at this, again, going back, the state on the regular, what they're bringing in the door on the income tax. If there is such a shift, they are not even aware of it, and they can go back and say, let's go. The example was the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. There was a lot of money pushed forward in 2016 on the estimated payments. In the fourth quarter, it was up 32%.
Which similar thing happened with the Obama 2011 deal where where people shifted the capital gains over from one year to another. And
that was the fiscal cliff. As
Right,
we called it.
right,
Correct.
right.
That's exactly the.
But the point is that happens all the time, and it's happening more and more. There are these huge scale tax changes that are happening at the federal level that we are dependent on. And so, I just want to put a marker down. I think we could probably talk about this till we're blue in the face, but I'd like to, at some of the this is just the beginning of these conversations, but I would like to think through the fact that we know that every few years, it seems, and I don't think this is going to change anytime soon, one way or the other, right? I mean, just listening to what the conversations are on the campaign trail, good, bad, and indifferent, there are lots of discussions about swinging back tax law changes. That could be a benefit to places like Montgomery County. That could be a detriment. But we're going to see these significant pendulum changes and the impact that it has. And because we are so dependent on such a small number of folks based on capital gains, we are at risk. And our entire budget is basically based on that. And so I'd like to figure out if we know that every 2, 3, 4 years, there's going to be a significant shift at the federal level that's going to significantly change behavior for those 50 folks who we're talking about. Yes, we'd like to expand it to more than 50 folks and grow the economy and build a private sector economy, exactly as the council president aptly noted to kick this thing off. But in the meantime, are there structural things that we can talk about of ways that we can address that to smooth out these challenges? And maybe it's not data sharing, because the other point that I wanted to ask about and make, and we talked a little bit about it on Tuesday, one of the secret sauces to the state level projections that you noted, that is a renowned process, is the collaborative nature of it. It involves the legislative branch with Department of Legislative Services and their economic folks. It involves the Comptroller's Office, the Treasurer's Office, Office of Management and Budget. I mean, it is a very collaborative approach. There's a revenue monitoring committee, as you know. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. That's made up of a lot of high-level folks, some who are economists, some who aren't, some who are more into the policy and the political realm, who have a sense of what's coming. And that mix creates a recipe that I think, by and large, with the exception of a few things that can't be seen, does a terrific job. And the record of how close the revenue forecasts are very good. And I'm wondering if we can mimic that, take the best that we've seen at the state level and mimic that type of collaborative approach. It also has the benefit of having confidential conversations about these things that are very sensitive, where the bombs are warned about beforehand with all the key stakeholders who are going to have to make very difficult decisions. So it isn't showing up to a meeting when the budget is being introduced and, oh, by the way, this $80 million reduction is now going to require a massive change, and we had to make this terrible decision that nobody likes, and there's really not much we can do about it. Weeks in advance of that, there would have been ongoing conversations with OLO and with council staff and with finance and OMB and others, and everybody would be more prepared for what was coming. And I think that's, as somebody who was briefed on some of that, even though I wasn't on the Revenue Monitoring Committee, you knew that the legislative presiding officers knew, and others knew. They might not have known what the numbers were going to be. They might not have known the specifics of where the math was going to end up, because that was a dance that was occurring up until the absolute last minute. But you knew more or less where things were looking and could prepare accordingly. You could temper your expectations. You could temper your language of what you were sharing with the public as that. And I think there's a lot of value to that approach.
It's the expectations aspect that I believe we're talking about. Is if you see something coming down the road, and a collaborative effort might be something, and again, I'll refer to our leadership about how that would take. But we have talked a number of times with our good colleagues at the Bureau of Revenue Estimates and that effort they do with the Department of Legislative Services and so forth. And that's the I'm preaching to the choir. You know, exactly. That is the process that they have used. They also use a committee. We use the Business Advisory Panel as a sense of, here's our economic assumptions. But the revenue assumptions are another issue that's more relevant when you go into the budget process to say, what's going to happen down there? Those are the kinds of dialogues that would lead us down the road to say, where are the bombs?
Yeah. So,
where are the mines?
Exactly. To your point. And so, as we talk about this, I mean, I'm interested in talking about the projections and where we failed and where we succeeded and how close we were and why. I mean, I think that's all important, but I think the more important outcome of this conversation that might not be concluded, and I don't expect to be concluded today, but is how do we make structural changes to the process to make it better? And I think creating our own version of a revenue monitoring committee, formally or informally, and I yield to finance on thoughts on that, but I think it would be of significant interest to me personally, and I think to this committee and to our entire council, because I think that it's an approach that I have seen firsthand work, and I think would work here within reason. I'm sure there are adjustments that would have to be made given the scope of staffing and expertise in different parts of government that we have at the county versus the state level, but I'd be particularly interested in it and would like to continue that conversation moving forward and figure out how we can make that happen.
Well, it's only being the chief economist, and no offense, but I think that kind of a procedure or question could be addressed at the finance director level, O&B level, and certainly our colleagues in the county executive staff about how we want to proceed with something like that process. I want to be very.
I'm formally asking it here. We've got the O&B director in the back of the room. You can take about. I understand that's a political, not political in the sense of leadership question, not just an economics an iteration question, but
protocol on a process issue too.
But I think it's both, because from my standpoint, I think we need Senator Madaleno, we need the county executive and the CAO to be on board, but we also need your expertise of understanding as the subject matter expert here of what is doable and what's not doable and where is the expertise and what would be of benefit to the overall process, not just for us as stakeholders and as people in positions of public trust, but for the process itself, the iterative process that you've discussed. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate this conversation, and I think, what we're doing today is obviously signaling items that we could follow up on. This would be, I think, a game changer in the sense that, every year, of course, it is a dance, and there is no doubt that this particular budget cycle, it was very tough for us to receive a budget that was pretty much predicated on this issue of the 80+ million dollars. And so how do you, at that point in time, as a council, find an alternative revenue source to not make the decision that we had to make? So it is political in many ways, of course, but I think our constituents expect us to work as collaboratively as possible early enough. And, it might mean that decisions still get made the way that they get made, but at least there is a sense coming onto the council of where are those areas that if we choose not to go with a particular, revenue decision that the executive has made, we at least can begin to think about, what are the possibilities of finding an alternative or not. And that would be groundbreaking in a lot of ways, I think. I believe it would be a lot more difficult because, of course, at the state level, you're dealing with, lots and lots of folks on the legislature, and here's basically 10, 10 people. But definitely something that I know I would love to understand if there was some model that we could, and the executive has expressed his desire for us to work a lot more collaboratively when it comes to budgeting, earlier on. So I think there's something there that we could look into. Council Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much. And first of all, why did they go back 5 years? And how often would they do that?
In terms of the
When you're,
employment data?
yeah, mm-hmm.
They have not gone back 5 years since I have been tracking the data from, they may go back a year, but 5 years, that was one of my queries into the Bureau of Labor Statistics on a couple other issues that I have to talk to them about. And I'm going to probably get more information next week when someone is going to, not to be personal here, but there will be a representative from BLS at a conference that I'm attending, and that is a couple of the questions I'll have to ask that person, and that's, and why the revisions?
Right.
They have both, for us, we don't have, our data are not, let me get a little technical, our data are not seasonally adjusted. So what it is what it is. But when you get higher up, at the state level, even at the regional level, those are seasonally adjusted numbers, and sometimes those numbers get revised as well because of the seasonal factor. So how often do they do this? 5 years was unusual. 1 year, yes. If in response to your, Mr. Cass, the other question, on the Bureau of Economic Analysis that I data referred to, they went back another 5 years because they revised the GDP data nationally going back 5 years because of technology changes and so forth. And when they changed the GDP numbers, that will drill down to the personal income level. Yep. That will drill down to the county level, to the state level, and so forth. So we see these revisions, and they're not going up. If there's an absolute world, when they do revisions, they don't go up for us. Right. They go down.
Right.
And that's the challenge. And it is.
It's a huge problem, and to Councilmember Friedson's point, I mean, we do have to figure out the best system we can figure out, working with everybody else to figure it out. All right, and when someone pays their 2018 income tax to the federal government, how fast does Montgomery County actually get those dollars in their pocket?
They probably get, based on their distribution, they would get the share of that. Now, how much of actually is Montgomery County? Is,
right,
again,
their portion.
Yeah. So they would get that in our distributions in May. Would be the first time we would see any semblance of that.
So someone pays on April 15th, yeah. Then we would start to get, or by April 15th, we would start to get some of that money the next month? We're talking about the withholding. When someone files a return, those returns aren't really reviewed until probably June, and that's probably when we'll see it. But no, I'm sorry, let me go back up. May, we're not seeing any returns. We get part of the withholding.
Until later on. It's only what comes in the door, as I referred to earlier, on withholding and estimated payments at the state level.
But there again, that's part of the revision, because if you withheld more money and you get a tax return, to keep this as simple as we can keep it, then that money would be less than what you'd be getting the next distribution, right?
Say that.
If I overpaid, quote unquote, from my withholding, and I get a tax return, I mean, I get money back, then obviously the county's not going to get their 3.2% of the part that was refunded to the consumer, I don't
think it's that instantaneous, Mr. Katz. I think it goes back to the formula that come up on the refunds. In other words, when we get our distribution on a quarterly, there's a refund value in that if you're getting a refund, we don't see it instantaneously at that level, no.
You don't?
No.
And so,
my understanding from the state, that's correct. I'll verify that. But.
Well, and I guess, and that's also part of the volatility of the capital gains, because that would, I mean, obviously to your point, they don't file until October, November, whatever they're doing, and sometimes it can be they'll pay a penalty and get even past that. Go ahead.
But the issue, I mean, to your point, the withholding really isn't the issue. I mean, wage income is pretty standard. You're talking about $1,000. I mean, the average tax return, pretty across the board on wage earners, $1,000, one way or the other, right? People are getting pretty close to within where they are. Wage earners are easy. It's the estimated taxes that people who are doing capital gains, that's where the huge discrepancies are. So the wage earners of when they pay in April, it's really a marginal difference, and it's all kind of smoothed out and somewhat, more or less, this is not an economic, but it comes out in the wash. In that, and it really doesn't have a significant impact on our budget. What has a significant impact on our budget are the huge capital gains numbers, which is not instantaneous, and that's where the lump sum payment that comes in November to the county is the whole game. I mean, that is like the entire ballgame, our entire, it's such a huge piece, and that's where we had when County Executive Leggett, if I recall, had his discussion of the property tax originally before it came to the council, and the council initiated, had a slightly different view on how that property tax would occur. That discussion started with a significantly lower than expected November distribution, which was largely on a small number of taxpayers and their changes in their capital gains.
But as a person who had the pleasure of paying an estimated tax probably my whole life, I understand the volatility of that as well, because there's years that you have a different income level, and you really don't know it till once you get your accountants on.
Refer to those as non-wage income. You have the withholding, then you have your estimated payments, your capital gains. You even have the dividends, interest, and rents, which are non-withholding. They're a little bit volatile too. Granted, they're a smaller proportion than the capital gains, but they track somewhat closely. But those are the non-wage, and those are the most volatile. Again, I'm repeating what Councilmember Fritz had said. They're the ones that rub, and for the county, that's a large proportion of our income.
I didn't, and it is, and that's to the point. And I think obviously we need, and not to belabor this, but I didn't realize it was only $1,000 difference for most, for the actual withholding. I mean,
I'm sorry, Mr. Katz, on the capital gains, we are about 40% of the state. And
I knew that. Yeah.
The DR, you're right. I mean, so if there's a volatility, that's where again, we're repeating it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I always appreciate when someone has the courage and conviction to agree with me. So.
Well, now,
feel free to proceed.
We're there.
Now that we have,
I'm turning off the mic.
now that we have Councilman Friedson working on this team, we're going to be much better off. Believe me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I think for council staff heard for this particular topic, maybe regarding the structural changes for the collaboration, and I'll just punt this out there to see if it's okay with the GO committee. There's already kind of a working group of OLO staff, council staff, and some council members' offices looking at the 2-year budget. Maybe we can just incorporate that into the conversation and see what we can do. And then from there could be, if there's any memorialized changes that the council wants to put in, whether through the code or resolution, we can do that so that this council puts its mark for future administrations and councils. But for now, gotta be careful. For now, I think that may be the best way to go. So I'm seeing noddings of heads.
Yes.
So we'll pursue that way. And then the other question, I know Mr. Friedson mentioned something about looking back at the 10 years or looking back at some of the discrepancies in our revenues. I'm not sure if that's a work session or just a report that you all are
That
looking
could be a report, and then
Okay.
if we need to have a work session discussion, we can do that. But I think Councilman
Yeah,
Friedman.
no, I understood that. Apologies. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think report would be great. But just to add one additional item that I neglected to mention, I mentioned it briefly on Tuesday, and Senator Madaleno had brought it up as well. But not just the Revenue Monitoring Committee, but there are certain recent changes that the state has implemented to put guardrails up on some of these extremely volatile revenue sources, particularly capital gains, and having a 10% gap, just like we do with estimated taxes, by the way. You have a 10% leeway on estimated taxes, and that helps taxpayers. And this is, I think, a best practice, and it's hopefully over time will help to smooth out. But I think if we could add that to the list of things that are looked at and discussed, and if there are other ways that we can look at, how do we put up guardrails to kind of protect the iterative process from itself? The data doesn't always, demonstrate these fluctuations that we know could happen. And so if we put in some of these protections in place, then maybe we miss some of the upside, but that's probably a good thing, because then we can bank some of the some of those resources for the downside that we know is inevitable.
Well, and I think that's a great segue, because I was looking at that in terms of fiscal policy issues, because that would be an area where I think the council could make its mark. So I will go ahead and segue transition to the fiscal policy conversation. As council staff notes, the main two resolutions that currently deal with fixed commitments that the council has said these are really important. Resolution 16555 from 2008 is about our OPEB. I'm not going to belabor that, because I know that council and all staff are going to release a report later this month that the council will pick up sometime in the fall, likely, that will have recommendations and items to consider for OPEB, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention OPEB as one of our fixed commitments that the council has taken seriously. And then Resolution 17312, which the council passed in 2011, coming out of the recession, I think is where most of the meat is for this council to look at. I'll just note a couple areas that are mentioned in that resolution for those watching at home and just for future. There's the conversation about having a structurally balanced budget, not only in the year that we approved, but in all the 6 years of the fiscal plan. There's also a requirement that we use one-time revenues for one-time expenditures, and as council staff notes, currently our fiscal plan doesn't really account for those, so it's difficult to know if we're meeting that policy goal. There's PAYGO, which is used in the CIP of the Capital Improvements Program. Currently, that's set at 10%. And then, as we've talked about many times, this is also the resolution that dictates our reserves policy and how that's calculated and how that's gone forth. So I think in that regard, council staff will just note a couple areas for further conversation. And to Mr. Friedson's point, this is one of them. So right now, the fiscal plan is structurally balanced, but it doesn't really communicate very well what our one-time revenues are, what our one-time expenditures are, and our major known commitments. And I think looking, and whether it's through a collaboration just on staff level or having a additional conversation at the GO committee, definitely figuring out how to update that fiscal plan to provide that information, I think will help the council in making future fiscal decisions, but also understanding kind of where things are at. And in particular, I think where the real work is how do we define one time? So again, to the income tax issue, maybe we say, hey, a certain percentage of income tax we're going to collar because we don't know where capital gains is going to come in at, but we need to maybe denote that as a one-time revenue if it comes in, and what are we going to do with that? So I think the real work for the committee would be defining one time across the board, not only for revenues, but for expenditures, so that the fiscal plan then can incorporate that concept. But as it stands now, we just don't really have, we can get that information, but it's not concisely shown. And then and so I'll stop there, because I think that I see a lot of nodding. So I think that's one place where we can really do a lot of work to update our fiscal policy and understand what was going on. I know that when I've talked to NOMB and finance staff, they also have concurred to that. I think the devil's in the details, but that's where council staff believes a lot of the efforts can be focused on this year.
I think that's a great suggestion. I think that it's refining what, we sort of embarked upon, a few years ago. But, and we said that even though the fiscal plan was always like the snapshot in time, et cetera, that we would constantly be monitoring and examining to see how we could refine, and this particular blueprint, because it is so important. And not a lot of jurisdictions do it, which I think, as much criticism as we receive, bottom line is that we're constantly looking at how we can best position ourselves. So, I think that this could be one of those follow-up items that staff perhaps can work on, and then when we get back from legislative recess, we can then react to, some suggestions that we could pursue. I know Councilmember Friedson, is that you? You have your light on? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the point of the one time and defining that, I think, is so important, because I do have concerns about what we define as one time, and it's easy to play. I would call it a budget trick or an accounting trick. I think that might be unfair at times, but it's not necessarily a trick, but it's just how it works, right? We have a general fund, so you can say something is paying for whatever you want, right. But the reality is, we either are on a path to next year, the budget is going to be balanced based on what we expect or not. And I think if we look at one-time savings, we also have to look at that definition of what is structurally balanced. I would argue we have a balanced budget, but not a long-term structurally balanced budget, because we know we don't expect the revenues to grow as our labor costs are growing, for instance, just with with minor adjustment. We had a staff packet that talked about a $1.5 billion discrepancy over the next 5 years based on what we have in our fiscal plan of what we expect revenues to be and what the increase of the contracts were. And that's a challenge, and we have to kind of work through that. We also have just natural escalators that aren't labor. Of course, personnel is 81, I think, % of our budget, so it's a pretty big part of it. But there are also just natural escalators as well that we know we're going to owe next year as opposed to this year that we can't afford based on what we expect revenues are based on the processes that you've put in place. So I think that the one time is important, but I also think that the structure is, and I know in 17.312 it is defined, but you can't have one without the other. Recurring revenue should fund recurring expenses. What is a recurring expense? What is funding what? I mean, I think I had a little bit of a disagreement with the executive branch over whether OPEB was directly only going to keep the reserves or whether it was going to fund ongoing expenses. I think there's an argument that probably could be made for either. The point being is it's just one big budget and we have certain costs, and the question is, next year, do we start in a hole? And I would argue that yes, next year we start in a hole. So I think we got to work through that. But the one-time expense, to your, as you mentioned, I think needs to be also had in the context of what we call a structurally balanced budget and what we set for ourselves as an expectation of 1 year's budget into the next year's budget if we're making budget decisions that we know are going to put us out of balance in the next year. And I think we need to try to avoid that as best as we can as part of this process.
Okay.
Very good. Then so we'll council staff will work with executive staff over the recess and kind of however long it takes to come back to the committee with some recommendations / ways to approach this, as well as defining one time. And that's where I believe ultimately what the council will need to do is adopt a resolution that only defines one time, but makes it very clear that that's expected in the fiscal plan, et cetera. So, and I also, just to kind of tie this all together, I mean, council staff thinks it would be very hard to do a 2-year budget if we don't have a 2-year. We already have a 6-year fiscal plan that gives us revenue projections and at least known fixed commitments. It's hard to know what the second year is unless we know the fixed commitments that are already built into our budget based on compensation, et cetera. So this is just a step in that policy direction, whether we get there this year or not.
Note that.
Excuse me?
I'm glad you brought it up. So I was just going to
Oh, well, my apologies.
No, that's quite all right, sir.
The other item, the PAYGO, has been set at 10% for a very long time. I don't think we need to get into that, but when Mr. Orland goes through the spend and affordability guidelines with the capital budget in the fall, as we do every biennial year or biennial process, that may just be a good time to quickly check in and see what other jurisdictions are doing and whether 10% is the right number or not. It's a great number, but it could be higher, could be lower, depending on what we think is the best. So that would be a good place to check in on that one.
Councilor McCutts.
Was that just an arbitrary figure? How did they end up with, because it sounded nice? I mean, how did they end up with 10% way back when?
I don't know.
It's a very iterative process.
It's what?
It's a very iterative process.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I can speak with Mr. Orland about that.
I would just as for, historical background. Thanks.
And then the last item, at least within the resolution 17.312, is our reserves. I mean, I think that given that we're just going to get to 10% in fiscal 20, there's no need to jump in to that particular item quickly, but a longer term review, since now that we're at 10%, is there a different, a higher percentage, say, that we actually need? I mean, 10% was chosen based on what was realistic over the duration of this decade. And I think that would also need to be done in collaboration with the executive staff. So I think that's just more of putting a marker out there that we're going to get there. And now is the time probably to start like taking a serious look at just the longer term vision for what our reserve should be. And as council staff knows, part of our reserves is restricted by the charter. There's 5% based on our general fund revenues from the previous fiscal year. And so there is that limitation, and how do we mesh that concept that the residents of the county want to restrict some of how much money we're putting away so that we're not just taxing for the sake of saving, but at the same time we want to also make sure that we have enough to handle significant downturns as we saw in 2010.
And there's also been conversation about, now that we reach this point, do we select some of the percentage that is not restricted and invest that and grow that? There's just been a lot of different conversations about how should we treat that particular reserve, and how should we leverage that and position it? And I think perhaps that can be part of the conversation when we come back to look at that specifically. I know OLO had done some work on other jurisdictions and what is their target, but I think getting to that target, there could be different ways that we do that versus just kind of parking the money there when we also have so many other needs. It does beg that question. For me, it was important that we get to that 10% goal, because that's what we had committed ourselves to do, and not kind of blow it all up before that. But now I think it's a good moment to at least explore different things. Councilmember Friesen.
Thank you. You took my first one, so now we've got a train going of good ideas or good points that are being taken by another member of the conversation. But I think that's a good thing, and shows that we're all on the same page here, and I think our interests are aligned of trying to get to a sustainable and a more less surprised process, right? To try to smooth out some of these sharp edges as much as we can to prepare for what we know is the inevitable. I had a similar question about the 10% and what do we do now, and how is that dealt with from a investment and a fiscal standpoint. The other question I had related to that is my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, and it's a slightly different process for me, so I'm still learning. But the things like snow removal and inevitable things we know are happening. One, I think I would like to add that to this conversation, because it is one of those obvious examples of inevitable things that we smooth over. It was an area, frankly, that I totally agreed with the executive branch and think that we should try to get as close to reality as possible, because we know we're going to fund it. Earlier this week, the devastating impacts of rain, we usually think of, we call it snow removal, but it's really weather-related events, and I am sure there is going to be a significant amount of money that is needed for Department of Transportation and all of the huge holes in roads and emergency personnel and overtime and the heroic work that was done by our first responders and our highway services crews who went out and handled very difficult situations. We've had a number of folks reach out to our office about significant amounts of flooding in their homes and on their streets, and massive amounts of damage, and how we're going to address that from a public policy standpoint and a community standpoint. But my understanding is, with, we'll call it snow removal, but weather fund, whatever that's called, we always go over. It's just a question of how much we go over, and that money comes out of reserves just like any other supplemental, and then at the end of the year, or the new budget, we fund it back. How does that work from year to year in terms of, we set a budget that says we're getting to 10%. So that's what this budget has, which is commendable. That was the plan we set out for, one of the three legs of the stool. We've done really well on two of those three legs of staying disciplined on it as a county. But we're basically spending some of that. We know we're going to spend some of that money for reserve, and that's partially why reserves are there to fund it. And then we're starting the next year by adding it back in, and then we know we're going to do the same thing the following year. Is that how it's supposed to work? I mean, is my question making sense here, that we're basically going from one fiscal year to another and kind of moving, passing along an obligation to keep at 10%, even though we know that we have basically an expense that's coming out of reserves that would bring it below 10%.
Well, I mean, the fiscal plan, the out years does assume there's a line for supplemental appropriations for about 20 million. So going into the next fiscal year, we kind of know that we're going to have to pay for additional snow costs. And so that's kind of the assumption we make. But you're right, the budget is only like 6 million for snow. So you're at some point paying it out of reserves or paying it out of some kind of set aside that we have in the fiscal plan. The out years.
So the 20 million is the set aside. So the way we could, I guess that's a better way to look at it. So thank you for focusing my thought and question. So the question is that set aside appropriate? Based on, if we know we're not, candidly, if we know we're not disciplined enough to not see the snow removal money as an opportunity to fund projects that we think need to be funded, like, significant cuts that the county executive made in transportation, which is largely, that was the decision point that the committee had and ultimately the council had, which is a totally understandable, very difficult question. Is eliminating bus routes something you'd rather do than funding snow removal? And it's very difficult to go to the public and say, hey, we got rid of your bus route because we think there might be snow next year, even though we know there is probably going to be snow next year. So is the appropriate thing for us to maybe look at is 20 million enough? If we're only funding it at 6 million, give or take, every year, and our average spend is 30 million, should it be high? And we have dink and dunk supplementals, average over the last 5 or 10 years we probably could look at, because I'm sure there's a pretty standard number of, a few $100,000 here, a few $100,000 there. Before you know it, there's real money that starts coming out of the supplementals. So maybe that's the area that we at least consider and look at to set up that guardrail to say maybe that set aside should be a bit higher to be more in line with what the expectations are. Is that
Yeah, I mean,
fair?
that's fair. And I think, ideally, it'd probably be better to just budget that money for snow. That way you wouldn't have to worry about set aside or going into reserve. So, but I think that is a good question. What is the right amount to budget in or set aside?
I guess the only problem is a set aside in the reserve for expected supplementals is a fiscal plan decision point, and we are probably going to be more disciplined with sticking to a fiscal plan if we can agree to it. Whereas if it's just an annual appropriation that we're hoping happens, it becomes an easy target. And, candidly, I'm not 100% accurate because OPEB, we have not, we've used that as basically a fund, a revolving fund account to offset, budget deficiencies at the end of the year, which is another area that we're going to look at. So it's not my suggestion isn't a perfect one, but at least it's one I think ought to be considered with the set aside, because I happen to think that it would be easier on the council to stomach the idea of this was what we agreed to as a fiscally prudent thing to do as a set aside for supplemental, so that we're not taking it out of reserves as opposed to one specific line item that gets budgeted, suggested, it gets slashed every year. We run into the same problem and it becomes a revolving challenge that never gets solved.
Well, I think that goes back to the original conversation about if we could agree to be collaborative in the whole revenue projection piece, because it is about, budget has all these pieces, right? So there is no doubt that year after year, the executive has made particular decisions, given whatever we're facing. And so you have things like snow removal, or you have the cable fund. There's there's some pots that obviously it is very difficult to predict what the snow expenditure is going to be. And, former executive Leggett used to love to share that joke about people that love watching snow, and for him every inch was $1 million, so he would see dollar signs falling, but the reality is that I think the challenge really is, do we all 10 of us agree that we will then absolutely respect this particular pot, or absolutely respect, and it is very difficult because we all know what happens, when you start having all your constituents telling you that this was left off or whatever, then there are those particular areas where you think, okay, well, maybe, hey, if it comes lower, we can take it from here, we can then put it back. There is no doubt the whole fiscal discipline piece is really important. That's not to say that we shouldn't look at some possibilities. We tried with OPEB, obviously, we created that consolidated trust, that wasn't there before. I think there are some things that we could explore. But there's no doubt that at least the snow removal, there have been years where the $5 million was okay. And then there were some that it was like 15, 20. It was insane. So it is hard to budget ahead, but I would agree that kind of taking a step back and seeing if there are some other possibilities to, to be able to signal or to be able to best calculate this whole issue of the set aside. And then we would have to, monitor that, because then a set aside, I mean, you've got 10 people thinking different priorities for that possible set aside. It was kind of like when Executive Elrich said, I gave you guys $10 million. And it was like, I know that $10 million dollars right now is like 100 in terms of like all the things.
Madam President, could I just note, though, that the time that was mentioned in a media report was referring to a capital expenditure for the Housing Initiatives Fund and not operating. And so it didn't.
$10 million?
Yeah. He said, well, I gave them $10 million and I don't know, what they're complaining about. And the Housing Initiatives Fund, $5 million that was underfunded was actually out of taxable debt, which is capital, not operating. But I don't want to mention that, but you brought it up. So, I had, I just think that as we talk about the reserves and we have that conversation, the snow removal is just a good example, and perhaps there are others, and maybe this could be the decision point that is discussed by the working group that is already in place that the council president has set up. But we don't have a choice, right? Like OPEB, we don't have a choice. Whether we like it or not, whether we want to or not, we have to pay for retirees' health care. We have made that commitment. We owe that money. Whether we like it or not, whether we want to or not, those beautiful snowflakes turn into snow on the street, and those streets have to be cleared. We don't know exactly what those dollars are going to be, but we know we've got to be ready to pay them. And so maybe it is appropriate to take it out of the 10%, and maybe that is plenty, and maybe that is the right practice. Maybe the set aside is the more appropriate place. Maybe budgeting it, but making it part of the fiscal plan of, things that we know are coming down the pike and what that number should be every year, and maybe we follow it, maybe we don't, but at least we have a marker and we either follow the fiscal plan or we don't. But I think that is an example of an area where if we have things that we know we're going to need and we have chronically not funded them to the level that is needed, and it impacts the other parts of the fiscal plan, then that ought to be part of the conversation as well.
You, Councilor Katz.
Thank you. And I, the whole thing for snow coming out of a reserve, I don't believe it should come out of that 10% reserve. Snow is one of those deals that if it snows on Monday starting at 8 o'clock, you don't have to pay overtime. If it snows on a Sunday, everything is overtime. So we have to have a system on how we figure it. Maybe we should have a reserve, and maybe this isn't the right term for it, just for snow or for emergency or whatever, that you would take from it, not the 10%, but a different reserve than you would pay. Maybe it should come out of liquor. I don't know, but something that because the way air reserves are set up, the way I see them, is that they really aren't savings accounts. It's not money that for the rainy day, literally the snowy day, you can take the money out and say, here, we're going to pay for it out of this. This money you still have to have as reserves.
I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify. I agree 100% with you. I'm not advocating for it to come out of the 10% reserves. What I'm saying is that it is anything above and beyond what we budget comes out of the reserves inevitably. And what I'm trying to say is either that is an appropriate way to fund it, which I agree it probably isn't, or it's not. If we aren't dedicated and disciplined enough to make sure that we have the right amount, one, we should figure out what the right amount is and have that be part of this discussion, and then figure out, should it be a set aside, should it be part of the budgeted amount, and how we deal with it. Because the reality is we do have a fund for exactly what you're talking about, but we just never fund it to the level
that's the point.
that is generally needed almost every year. And so the question is, what are the things that we can do as part of this fiscal plan discussion to make us more disciplined and to put a more specific marker down of what the expectations are, so that moving forward we don't get into that situation.
And we're basically in agreement, but I believe that we need to have these types of discussions going forward so that we don't keep getting into the same problems that we always have. And then we need to look at really what are our reserves? I mean, the variety of reserves that we have, what are we actually, reserving for? And whether our numbers really still, like the 10%, whatever. When we use these types of percentages, what are they based on and why are they based on it? And if they're still valid. So I think we have the opportunity to go forward and have a better situation. It's just we need to have the good conversations.
I agree. I'm also, I also like to be practical and realistic, because this conversation has to go hand in hand with the parallel conversation around the 2-year budgeting or outcomes-based, because the bottom line is that, none of these decisions were made for frivolous, services, or, the bottom line is that even with this last budget, we know nobody wanted to support having to approve the savings plan for, regarding OPEB. But how are you going to fund the schools, and how are you going to fund those services that our, constituents expect? I mean, there comes a moment where the rubber hits the road.
Literally.
And it's great to sit here and say that, we're going to do this and that and the other, until you get all of these constituents coming and saying, are you not going to fund the, meals for seniors? Are you not going to fund the schools, amount that was left short? Are you not going to fund? And so I just want to also, out of respect for the former executive and everybody else, also recognize that this is, these are not frivolous decisions that were just made because, we want to have, nice, extra luxurious things and we're going to take it from here. So as part of this conversation, we don't want to lose sight of the other conversation, which has to do with, can we agree on some general sort of principles around the policies and the programmatic direction, priorities that we have put in place, because they have to match. It is not separate, It is real when it comes to making those, raising your hand. Again, this last budget, where were we going to find that additional $80 million? Nobody had a proposal for where we were going to find an alternative $80 million. I mean, watch us. And look, I was here when we rebased the school system's budget. I was here when we changed, how much our employees were going to pay in terms of percentages for their benefits. I was here when we did furloughs. I was here when we did all, and trust me, it is not a pretty thing. And so I want to make sure that as we're talking about all of this, and I do believe that we can, it's a good moment for us to arrive, perhaps at some, different places. I do want to make sure that we also keep in mind what happens when we're making those budgetary decisions and where is this money going to, as well, because it's not going to be that simple. But I do think that there is space here for us to get into a better situation. And as I said earlier, I was really hoping that we wouldn't be here at this moment in time, after having made all those difficult fiscal policy decisions during the recession and feeling like, okay, we made it, we ripped that Band-Aid, it was ugly, but, it is really annoying to have to be back here, dealing with all of this, because back then, the reason why we did all of those things was precisely because we didn't want to be in a situation where we would have to look at things like OPEB to backfill these. We didn't want to do that, and that was the whole point. So it is great to have council members like Councilmember Friedson to come in now and be like, all right, so here we are. This is this is 2019. Where are we? How can we look at this? And also some of us that have been here longer to kind of say, well, this is why it would happen. What are those opportunities as well now to get us into, a space when we don't have to, deal every year during budget with these just really unpleasant choices. So I think that I'm really happy that we're having this, opportunity to, in a more leisurely fashion, go through some of these particular fiscal indicators and policies, and that we can now come back. I think we've set the stage for some really great stuff to come back to in September, and maybe then react to some actual recommendations that maybe we can adopt, and then bring forth for, hopefully in time for next year's budget, et cetera. So anything else that we've missed?
No, not at this time. Council staff will work with the appropriate parties and especially the GO chair to make sure we have the right items scheduled in September-ish, October maybe even, for the ones that need to be decided and other ones that will take a little longer.
Great. And so we'll get the information out about PAYGO and why that was the target. You've kind of kept the list of all of our outstanding items, but I think this was really, really productive. I really do appreciate you being here, Mr. Fine, and everybody here from OMB as well. I think even this piece right here, it's part of this collaborative approach that, I think in the past we've always been reacting to everything that's happening, that we never had really opportunities to do this. So I do appreciate it very much. All right, so with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.